Okay, picture this for a moment.
Hmm.
You've got a doctor working in Italy, yeah? Scrolling through WhatsApp, seeing complaints from colleagues. She's working hard in a modern hospital, in a prosperous European country.
Hmm.
But all she feels is this real uncertainty about her own paycheck. It's December, Calabria, lights everywhere, but she's just trying to figure out how much of her salary she's actually going to get to keep this month.
It's a really unsettling picture, isn't it? And that's the stark reality we're going to be exploring today. We're doing a deep dive into something quite complex, quite troubling.
Yeah,
It's what our source material, De la Habana a Calabria, calls the alleged perfect scam against Cuban doctors working right there in Italy.
exactly. So our mission today really is to unpack how a program that, started out with good intentions, providing medical help, tackling a healthcare crisis in Italy, seems to have become, allegedly, this sophisticated system of exploitation.
Right. And the paradox is stunning.
It is. Because this is happening even though Italy actually tried to stop this kind of thing.
Hmm.
We'll look at how this system of double contracts apparently funnels money away from these doctors.
Hmm.
We'll look at how their freedoms are restricted and, what international bodies are starting to say. And this is the kicker.
Mm.
It's persisting in a place like Italy, an EU nation you'd think would have safeguards against this.
It's a really compelling case study in how desperation can be turned against people.
So let's start at the beginning then. The lure and then the tough reality for doctors like Melba Santos and Indira Campos. What makes them sign up for something like this?
Well, often it's just sheer desperation back in Cuba. I mean, they're dealing with a lack of basic things. They can't really practice medicine properly because of shortages everywhere.
Right.
Plus, they have this regulated status, which basically means they can't leave Cuba without a government contract. Dr. Santos, for instance, she talks about feeling just miserable at home. Couldn't treat patients properly, no medicines. She even got things like sanitary pads and cooking oil from her patients.
Wow.
And those goods, they represented like 40% of her monthly salary back in Cuba. Gives you a sense of the situation.
So hearing she could earn 67,000 euros a year in Italy, that must have sounded like an absolute dream, a lifeline. But the source material shows a pretty harsh contrast, doesn't it? What's the actual take-home pay like?
It's brutal. The reality is she ends up with about 6.68 euros per hour. That's it. Even though Italy is paying 34.50 euros an hour for her work.
Wait, 68, that's
Yeah.
barely more than an undocumented farm worker might make down south in Foggia, right?
Exactly. It really highlights the alleged gap, the financial extraction that's happening.
Okay, so what about Italy's side of this? Because initially, they really did have good intentions, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Since late 2022, they wanted to pay the doctors directly, cut out the middleman, avoid precisely this kind of abuse.
That's right. And it was driven by a genuine crisis, especially in places like Calabria. Years of corruption, low pay, organized crime hollowing out the health system.
Yeah.
Calabria's president, Robert Epiudo, he was pretty blunt about it. He said the idea to contact Cuba's medical services company, the CSMC, quote, arose from desperation.
Okay, desperation on Italy's part, too. But despite trying to pay directly, this double framework still got set up, allegedly. Can you explain that?
Sure. So you have the first contract. This one's from the Italian Regional Health Service. It lays out the job, the pay, all under Italian labor law. Sets a competitive salary, like that 67,000 euros Dr. Santos expected. That's Italy trying to do the right thing.
Okay, that sounds straightforward. But then there's this second contract, the one from Cuba's CSMC. How does that one mess things up?
Well, that's the one that seems to unilaterally impose completely different conditions. It basically says, okay, Italy pays you X, but you only get this fixed stipend, usually around 1,200 euros a month. And it explicitly claims a huge chunk of the salary Italy pays. So at the end of the day, it's the CSMC contract that really dictates what the doctors earn, even with direct Italian payments.
So how does that actually work month to month? How do they, get the money back from the doctors?
It's quite methodical, apparently. Every month, the doctors get their full salary directly from the Italian authorities into their Italian bank accounts.
Right.
Then, almost immediately, they get a message from the mission leadership, submit your payslip within 48 hours. The mission calculates how much CSMC claims based on its own internal rates.
Okay.
And then they send the doctor a bank transfer notification saying, essentially, you have 24 hours to transfer this specific amount back to the CSMC's account, which is also conveniently located in Italy.
Wow. Okay, so it's direct pressure, tight deadlines.
Yeah.
And the numbers you mentioned, They're left with what, maybe 30–40% of their base pay?
Sometimes even less.
Yeah.
The sources say between 28% and 46% of the base salary, and for extras like overtime, it drops to 28.5% or even lower.
That's staggering. But it's not just the amount, is it? It's the way they allegedly do it. This ghost tax on overtime sounds particularly, well, sneaky.
It really is. It's quite an insidious tactic, according to the reports. The CSMC tells the doctors that 43% of their overtime pay is being deducted as an Italian tax.
43%.
43%. But the source material suggests this tax is completely fabricated. It doesn't go to the Italian tax authorities at all. It goes straight into CSMC's pockets.
Unbelievable.
So say a doctor works hard, earns 1,000 euros in overtime. After this supposed 43% tax, they only see 285 euros of it.
And Italian tax law doesn't work like that for overtime, right? Or that income bracket.
Not at all. That 43% tax bracket in Italy only kicks in for annual income over 50,000 euros, and overtime has different specific tax rules. This seems completely separate from Italian reality.
So they've essentially invented a tax to siphon off money. That's incredibly manipulative. And does this pattern show up elsewhere beyond just the base pay and overtime? What about bonuses like the Italian 13th month bonus?
Yes, the MES 13, the 13th month bonus paid in December, a very similar story there. In December 2024, reports indicate the CSMC took over 80% of that bonus.
80%?
Over 80%. Dr. Santos, for example, she was expecting maybe 50% of it based on past calculations, but she only received 19%, no explanation given. Understandably, this caused a lot of anger and confusion among the doctors.
I bet. And there was that incident with the coordinator, wasn't there, Ivan Martinez Rivera?
That's right, a really telling anecdote. He was the coordinator for the Crotone Medical Brigade. Initially, when the doctors protested about the bonus deduction, he actually seemed sympathetic.
Yeah.
He even told them, apparently, don't make the transfer yet, wait for further notice. But just hours later, after a video conference with top officials in Cuba, including the health minister,
He changed his tune.
completely, he had to retract his statement and confirm that the amounts CSMC demanded were correct and had to be transferred. It really suggests that the orders and the pressure are coming from very high up.
Which raises a big question, doesn't it? What does this mean for transparency, for accountability? Especially when Cuba officially says these doctors voluntarily donate part of their salary.
That's the official narrative, yes. Voluntary donation for the good of Cuba. But if it's voluntary, you'd expect that money to loop back into Cuba's own healthcare system, wouldn't you?
You would hope so.
But the source findings paint a very different picture. They suggest that less than 2% of the billions these missions generate globally actually gets reinvested in Cuban health.
So where does the rest go?
The vast majority, allegedly, gets diverted into things like the tourism sector, propping up other parts of the Cuban economy. It makes that voluntary donation claim look, well, pretty shaky.
It certainly has. It sounds much more like an obligation than a donation.
Exactly. It paints a picture where the donation is anything but voluntary.
Okay, so we've got the financial side mapped out, the low pay, the deductions, the alleged ghost tax. But it's not just about the money, is it? Their actual lives in Italy are heavily controlled, too.
Oh, absolutely. Their day-to-day existence isn't governed by Italian rights or laws, even though they're living and working there. It's governed by Cuba's internal mission rules, like this document called Circular Number 13, the internal regulation of the Cuban medical mission in Italy.
So let's get into those non-financial controls. What kind of restrictions are we talking about?
Well, one of the biggest things is restrictions on movement. They need explicit permission for practically any travel. Even just traveling to another city within Italy or needing to go back to Cuba for a family emergency requires approval.
Really? Even for emergency?
Even then. And it can be incredibly frustrating. Dr. Campos talked about trying to get an Italian driving license. She had to do it basically in secret, as if it were a crime, she said.
Why?
Because her superiors questioned her, asking why she'd even need one. It shows that level of control over personal autonomy.
And what about their social lives? Can they connect with people outside the mission?
That's heavily restricted, too. They're explicitly forbidden from joining Italian trade unions. They can't participate in protests. They're even discouraged from forming personal relationships with Italians or permanent residents.
Discouraged or forbidden.
Any relationship like that has to be reported to the mission leadership. Dr. Campos mentioned they wanted her to report literally every personal relationship she formed. She called it crazy.
Wow. And how do they ensure compliance? How do they stop people from speaking out or leaving?
There are multiple layers. First, they have to sign a commitment of confidentiality. This legally binds them, supposedly, not to discuss their CSMC contract details for up to 2 years after the contract ends. Breaking it is a serious offense.
Okay.
Then there's the threat of being labeled a deserter if they refuse to return to Cuba when ordered. The penalty for that is an automatic 8-year ban from entering Cuba. They can't see their families.
8 years.
8 years. And the CSMC also apparently threatens to get them barred from practicing medicine in Italy, even though Italian laws, like the Decreto Flussi for foreign workers, should technically allow them to regularize their situation and practice independently if they have the qualifications.
So it sounds like the whole system is geared towards maintaining absolute control and preventing anyone from, well, escaping the system. What does that do to people psychologically?
It creates a huge psychological burden. Doctors describe living in constant fear, constantly self-censoring. They're afraid of being accused of having political ideological problems.
Which could mean anything, really.
Exactly. Or they fear being reported by their own colleagues. Just speaking negatively about the Cuban government could lead to a report being forcibly sent back to Cuba and losing any chance of working internationally ever again.
So you can't trust anyone.
Dr. Santos put it very starkly. She said she feels she can't embrace the freedom she technically has in Italy because she's always worried a Cuban colleague might overhear something and report her.
And on top of all that, there's pressure to actively participate in political activities, right?
Yeah.
Propaganda.
Yes, mandatory participation. They have to engage in political events, social media campaigns promoting the mission. They're even required sometimes to post photos from their workplaces, sometimes even showing patient procedures to generate positive PR for the mission.
And there's even a group monitoring this.
There is. A so-called social media and historical memory group, actually made up of other doctors within the mission. Their job is literally to monitor their colleagues' online activity, check if they're sharing the official propaganda, liking the right posts.
Seriously, doctors policing other doctors' social media.
Yes, we saw a leaked internal document mentioned in the source where one doctor in this group, Dr. Dianelis Dorta Fernandez, actually reported fellow doctors by name for being non-participating. She listed them for analysis.
Analysis? That sounds ominous.
It's described as the first step in an internal control process that can ultimately lead to being recalled to Cuba.
And this deep dive also suggests there's sort of a two-tiered system emerging within the mission itself based on this compliance.
It seems so. Those who play the game, who are seen as compliant and enthusiastic about the political activities, they allegedly get perks.
Like what?
Maybe slightly better pay calculations, sometimes food vouchers, maybe better housing arrangements compared to others. It creates divisions. Dr. Campos said it seems to depend on, quote, the level of sycophancy that you have with the boss.
Classic divide and conquer. It creates mistrust among the doctors themselves.
Precisely. Keeps everyone isolated and focused on their own survival within the system.
It's a really bleak picture. But you mentioned earlier this isn't going completely unnoticed internationally.
No, it's definitely drawing more scrutiny now. The European Parliament passed a resolution specifically condemning what it called modern slavery and forced labor conditions in Cuban medical brigades globally.
Okay.
And the UN's Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery has also specifically raised concerns about Italy's agreement and involvement.
How does Cuba respond to these kinds of accusations?
Generally, they defend the missions as acts of international cooperation and solidarity, but they tend to avoid addressing the specific allegations about contracts, salary retention, or restrictions. The sources interpret this as a significant lack of transparency.
And the legal situation here is interesting too, isn't it? The difference between Cuban law and Italian law.
Very much so. There's a real legal asymmetry. Cuban law apparently has significant loopholes. It doesn't clearly define things like forced labor or debt servitude in ways that align with international standards.
Right.
Italy, on the other hand, has a robust legal framework protecting workers' rights. So these alleged practices by CSMC restricting movement, the constant surveillance, the massive salary retention, they appear to directly violate fundamental principles of Italian law.
Like what?
Things like the inviolability of human rights, the right to fair pay, freedom from forced labor. These are enshrined in Italian law and international treaties Italy has signed.
So could there be legal consequences in Italy?
Potentially, yes. The source suggests these practices could open the door to criminal charges in Italy, things like reducing someone to slavery or severe labor exploitation. And there's even the argument that Italy itself could bear international responsibility by omission, essentially, for not investigating and stopping these alleged violations happening on its own soil.
That's a really important point. And zooming out, why is the fact that this is happening in Italy particularly significant?
Because Italy is a wealthy, democratic EU member state. If these conditions can persist there under an agreement with the Italian government, it sort of legitimizes similar agreements Cuba has with less developed countries around the world.
I see. It sets a precedent.
Exactly. There are around 24,500 Cuban professionals reportedly working under similar conditions in about 56 countries. What happens in Italy makes it much harder to challenge the model elsewhere.
And it creates this really stark, dehumanizing contrast, doesn't it? You mentioned Foggia earlier.
Yes, the source draws that parallel. You have these highly trained Cuban doctors working indoors in air-conditioned hospitals, and just 400 kilometers away, you might have undocumented agricultural workers toiling in the fields under harsh conditions.
Different jobs, different settings.
Totally different professions, but the underlying reality described is disturbingly similar. A profound lack of freedom, a state of precarity, all driven by economic necessity back home.
Which brings us back to Dr. Melba Santos. Her words are incredibly powerful.
They really are. She says, simply, "I feel like a slave." And she admits she's terrified to speak out, fear for her family back in Cuba, fear of that 8-year ban, fear of losing her ability to practice medicine even in Italy if she defects. It just cuts right to the heart of the matter.
Yeah, it really does.
So when we pull all this together, what have we seen? It's this deeply uncomfortable paradox, isn't it? A country like Italy genuinely trying to fix a healthcare problem, but inadvertently getting tangled up in a system that stands accused of severe exploitation. And you have these highly skilled professionals who left home seeking a better life, now seemingly trapped by money, by politics, by fear.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About how these systems can be set up, looking legitimate on the surface, but hiding something much darker underneath. It really challenges us, you, the listener, to think about the complexities here. International cooperation, human rights, the hidden costs.
Absolutely. And this deep dive reveals a system where that very human desire for a better life, for opportunity, can somehow lead people into new kinds of bondage.
Yeah. It leaves us with a pretty challenging question, I think. How do we, as a global community, actually define and protect freedom and fair labor when desperation is such a powerful driver and fear is the ultimate tool of control?